Oh, my poor Silvia. Sorry, girl. Hey, Silvia. Sorry about all that snow. Welcome to day 9 of our adventure. Today we leave Lander and go through the South Pass. I've been looking forward to that for a long time. And we end up in Evanston, Wyoming. I delayed our departure this morning. It's almost 9 o'clock because when I woke up it was in the low 20s here. It should be around 30 now. And where we're going to tonight, this morning it was 15 degrees. Tomorrow it's going to be 20 or something. We'll see tomorrow. But anyway, I feel the need for a biscuit. So let's get you fueled up also before we leave and then get on the road. So what do you think of the view? The main reason we waited until almost 9 o'clock to get out this morning is I didn't want to hit ice on the road. And the other thing I did this morning is I had to do a repair. I've told you that I have a heated jacket liner. Each sleeve has connectors to connect into heated gloves. And this one was working, this one was not. And a couple of days ago I thought about cutting into the sleeve and see if I could figure out what the problem was, but I was afraid of ruining the vest. But after the ride yesterday, I decided that I needed to take a chance. So this morning I took my razor knife and made a small slit near the cuff, and pretty quickly saw that a wire had broken. I had tape, I had the razor knife, I even had a cheap Harbor Freight multimeter that I was going to use if I needed to find where the fault was. But it was obvious what the problem was. I wired it together, taped it up, I had a sewing kit. I got it out, sewed up the cut in the fabric, and it works, so we're good. Let's head on to South Pass. Nice view, about 8,200 feet, 25 degrees. A beautiful sunny day. I said before that the Oregon Trail wasn't really one trail, that over its 30-year life, there were multiple alternative routes that were developed. I'm at the Lander Cutoff. Started in 1858, and the Lander Cutoff saved as many as 7 days of travel compared to the old route through Fort Bridger. Fort Bridger is where I'm going to go to, and that's where the California Trail breaks off from the Oregon Trail. And it says by taking this cutoff, the Lander Cutoff, it avoided the expensive ferries across the Green River to the south and bypassed a 50-mile waterless desert of the Sublet Cutoff. The Sublet Cutoff was another cutoff that I guess was developed before the Lander Cutoff in 1858. With the Lander Cutoff, the longest waterless section was only 10 miles and had access to abundant grass and firewood. I like the cutout across the top. That's pretty neat. Lori would love to have that back in her flower garden. That's pretty cool. And over there's Silvia. I couldn't ride over here. It's blocked by snow. I made it! Can't get Silvia over there, but I can walk. I'm standing in South Pass, Wyoming. I think the trail went right along in front of us here. I'm going to pan slowly so you can appreciate the pass and what it meant to the immigrants. Now there's a minor range there, but the Rockies are to the south of us, and there's a mountain range right over there. We'll keep panning. And there's a pretty significant range right there. I forgot the name of them, but I certainly couldn't go over those. And back where I started. And I'm sure that I've explained by now the significance of the pass, because the immigrants in their wagons could not get over the Rocky Mountains. And they were going to Oregon, so they couldn't take the southern route, go through Texas and New Mexico. They had to continually work northwest. And so this pass was perfect. You just gradually increase in altitude day after day, and then you don't even know it, you're on the other side of the Continental Divide. Without this pass, the expansion of our country toward the west would have taken longer. It would have happened, but it would have taken much longer. I'm in the little town of Farson, Wyoming, with less than 300 people. Just had a very nice lunch at a little cafe right over there. It looked like a hole in the wall, but had a lot of vehicles around it. And I walked in and it was obvious that I was a foreigner, but everyone was friendly and I had a nice lunch. I'm at this place called the Big Sandy River. There's not a whole lot to say about this, except it was a kind of a natural pathway between here and the South Pass. But the thing I really wanted to point out, the Donner Party encamped here July 24th, 1846, before making its fateful decision to try a new shortcut to California. I'm at Pilot Buttes. And I think they have the name Pilot because the immigrants use them as a landmark. There's a number of markers here, and I'm going to walk around and check them out, and supposedly some trail ruts. So the folks going to Oregon, even though they had South Pass behind them, they still had more than half of their journey ahead of them, and it was the roughest part. The people going to Utah, the Mormons, had less than a month before they got to Salt Lake City. Here's a marker that makes you think. It's a burial on the trail. And note, there's no coffin, just maybe a blanket and a shallow grave. Many immigrants worried about the lack of propriety of a simple grave on the windswept prairie and vowed to return and provide a proper resting place. Very few of the immigrant graves have been located. Markers disappeared, and in some cases wild animals scavenged the graves. Stories of family members later returning to search for a loved one's final resting place are common, but the searches were usually fruitless. Oh, more death on the trail. Poor sanitation and burial practices perpetuated the disease, which was cholera. People might die beside a river, and they would dig a shallow grave and bury them, and then that would pollute the nearby river and affect more people. Well, this is pretty cool. One of the markers talked about trail ruts, and here's a marker for the Oregon Trail and the Mormon Trail and the California Trail and the Pony Express. There's the trail going off into the distance. If I just pan around, there's a marker for all four. And look there, looks like it splits right there for whatever reason. I don't know why, but that looks like a trail to me. Very pretty place. Okay, this marker talks about the telegraph. And you see there horses, or no, those would be mules probably, wagons with wire and poles. And it says it passed along the trail right in front of this sign. By the fall of 1861, the first message from New York to San Francisco was sent along the telegraph, and that ended the Pony Express. That had to be like magic. Send a message across the country. Had to be an amazing time to be alive. Not that I want to go back and live in 1860, but there's about a 10-year period there when there had to be a lot of excitement. You had the trail, the Oregon Trail, California Trail, Mormon Trail, then the stagecoach, then the Pony Express, and then the telegraph, and then the Continental Railroad in a 10-15 year period. It had to seem like the country was on the move and doing big things, and it was, but an interesting time to be alive. But I would skip the cholera and dysentery and the gunshots and the drowning in the rivers and getting run over by a wagon. I'm in Green River at the site of the Lombard Ferry. And everyone had to cross the Green River. There were multiple ferries and crossings here. Before the spring runoff and in late summer when the water level was low, fords were relatively safe. But by the time most immigrants got here, the Green River was at the height of its annual flood, and it flowed swift, wide, and deep. So several enterprising pioneers settled along the river and set up ferries, and ferry prices usually were high, ranging from $3 to $16 per wagon, and were virtually the only way to cross the river. And ferry prices changed sometimes daily to correspond with changes in the water level. It often took several days for large wagon trains to cross the river. And this one talks about one day at a time, how the travel soon got monotonous, up before dawn, early breakfast, hitch up the stock and begin the day's journey. But after crossing the Green River, they could breathe a sigh of relief as another major challenge was now behind them. And they were about 55 miles from Fort Bridger, which was the next place to resupply with food or purchase fresh animals. The last place they were able to do that was Fort Laramie, and that was about a month behind them, 340 miles behind them. I'll be talking more frequently about the Mormons now as we get closer to Salt Lake City, because they did a lot of improvements to the roads. They built bridges, they built ferries. Of course, you had to pay a toll, but still it helped the Oregon and California immigrants and provided income for the Mormons. And the Mormons were very organized. Even their wagon trains, I've read, were very organized. One thing, they only had to travel maybe half the distance of people going to Oregon, so they could leave later in the summer. Their religion united them. They had a single purpose. They knew exactly where they were going. The Mormons had good trail guides. I saw at one place we stopped a couple of years ago. The Mormons made a like an odometer that they attached to wagons. It had spokes and gears, all made out of wood, and it could track how many miles the wagon had traveled, and they included that in their handbooks. That was an eye-opener. Cruising down the road about 70 miles an hour, and looked like 200 antelope. Just suddenly, there they were. They weren't in the road, but I slowed way down because you don't know what they're going to do. Excuse me. Excuse me. Hey! I might regret it, but I'm going to blow off Fort Bridger. It's not a national park, it's a state park with a fee area, and I don't mind paying a fee. I drove over there, and again, it's dirt and gravel roads, snow piled everywhere. I'm not sure I want to get into all that. Fort Bridger was very important on the trails. It was the next major resupply point after Fort Laramie, and it was also the point where the trails diverged. The original Oregon Trail came to Fort Bridger and then headed northwest toward Oregon. In later years, there were cutoffs before this point so that the Oregon-bound immigrants could take a shortcut and not come down to Fort Bridger, because they came down southwest to the fort and then went northwest back from the fort. So there was the V in the trail, and there were cutoffs later developed to get rid of that V. But the California Trail kind of did the same thing. It came down to Fort Bridger and then went back northwest a little bit and around the north side of Salt Lake and into Nevada. Now, after the Mormons came in 47 and blazed a trail from here, Fort Bridger, on to Salt Lake City, a lot of the people going to California were pretty much, my understanding is pretty much all the traffic going to California then went through Salt Lake City. The Mormons had orchards, vegetables, fresh food, and supplies, and the Mormons were very willing to sell those at a good price. And the Donner Party made a mistake at Fort Bridger. Instead of taking the normal route to California, there was a guy that convinced him, Hastings, that there was a shorter way. Now, this was in 46, so the Mormons had not come through yet and established Salt Lake City. So the Donner Party was pretty much the first people that took this cutoff, this shortcut, and they ran into a lot of problems. It was actually longer, delayed them getting it over the Sierra Nevadas, and got caught in a snowstorm, and everyone knows what happened then.